Okay, we are in a beach barren, and today I'm going to go over, for sim pilots, exactly how the throttle, the mixture, and the propeller lever work on a constant speed propeller equipped aircraft. So the beach barren is pretty typical of that. So we are flying on autopilot heading due west at an altitude of 3,000 feet. So we're in normal cruise, and so let's pop into the cockpit and see what's going on. So we have a Garmin 1000. Now I'm going to set this up, pull it back a little bit so you can see the levers, the throttle, the propeller, and the mixture. And at the same time, you can see the RPM of the engine and the propeller, the manifold pressure in inches of mercury, which is proportional to the throttle setting and the amount of power being developed. The altimeter set at 3,000, autopilot set at 3,000, and let's take a look at the cruise. We're cruising at about 146, 145 and a heading of west. So back we go. Let's get this image back to where I want it. There. So with a constant speed propeller equipped aircraft, it's very different from a fixed pitch propeller aircraft. A fixed pitch propeller aircraft, when you increase the throttle, the RPM of the engine and the propeller increase because you're adding more power. It's kind of like a single speed bicycle. You pedal faster, you go faster. However, with a constant speed propeller, it's more like shifting gears. Not exactly, but it's similar. And the constant speed propeller mechanically is totally independent of the throttle. It's mounted directly on the crankshaft of the engine, and the engine has a hollow crankshaft, so engine oil goes through to the front of the propeller hub, and there's a governor. And what the governor does is, however the engine and the propeller try to turn faster, the governor will counteract that by increasing the pitch of the propeller blades, creating more resistance, taking a bigger bite in the air, and that will prevent the engine and propeller from actually turning faster. So how is it that an engine would want to turn faster? Well, it's usually by applying more throttle, increasing the manifold pressure. So if we do that, it tries to make the engine turn faster, but the governor won't allow it. So all that happens is the engine and the prop stay at the same speed, but the pitch of the propeller increases, it becomes more coarse. That'll make the plane actually go faster. So essentially, with a constant speed prop at a fixed RPM setting, increasing throttle increases manifold pressure and will make the plane go faster. Now, of course, with any aircraft, if the plane goes faster, it has an effect on the amount of lift and changes altitude, but that's normal pilot stuff that's true with any aircraft, and I've covered that in one of my other videos. So let's just look at all of the controls and how they interact. At 3,000 feet, the air is fairly dense. The engine is set up so that if the mixture control, which has the red knob, is full forward, that the fuel and air going into the carburetor are at the right ratio of volume so that the engine is running optimally. However, once you get above 6,000 feet, the air starts to thin out significantly or becomes less dense, such that even though you've got the same amount of fuel going into the carburetor, you've got less air. So the engine starts to run rich, which reduces performance. To compensate for that, you can pull back on the red lever and let less fuel get into the engine in order to get that magic ratio of fuel and air back to getting maximum performance. But also, when you get higher up in altitude, you may have the mixture pulled back to get the perfect air fuel mixture, But overall, there's less fuel and air going into the engine, so you get less horsepower. So if you're flying, say, at 10,000 feet, you're not performing or producing the same horsepower as you would at a lower altitude. If you have enough throttle left, you can push it forward, increase the manifold pressure back up to normal levels, and try to get the same horsepower back again. There's a limit. So once you reach that limit, then you need an engine that has a device that will push more air in. Those are called turbochargers or superchargers, depending on how they operate. This aircraft is not turbocharged, so it does have a limit to how high it can fly. So anyway, let's see how all these levers work. But first, we'll talk about the shape and the color of them. In order that you don't accidentally grab the wrong lever without looking at it, they have different shapes. Throttles tend to be smooth, whether they have a round ball on it or a smooth cylinder such as this. Propeller levers have round ridges on them. Mixture levers have sharp ridges, so just by feel you can tell if you have the correct lever in your hand. And while we're at it, this aircraft is also equipped with retractable landing gear. So the landing gear lever, which you obviously don't want to touch at the wrong time, is shaped like a round wheel, so that you can associate that with the wheels of the aircraft. Flap levers tend to be flat, like flaps. Anyway, we're at 3,000 feet, we're stable, cruising, and let's see what happens if we pull back on mixture. It's a constant speed propeller, so the engine and the propeller speed shouldn't change much. But you will notice eventually it just goes past the limit and the engine stops performing and is actually about to quit, and so the RPM will drop. So will manifold pressure. So let's slowly pull back mixture and see what happens. Now keep your eyes on these two gauges. Now slowly, so very little change yet, but I will get to the point where there's just not enough fuel to run the engine. And there it goes. So we don't want to go any further than that. I don't want the engine to quit, and we'll put it back up to full rich. So during that time, the constant speed prop tends to keep the engine and prop more or less the same speed. Now let's play around with the propeller lever and see what happens. Now it's set for the optimum RPM for cruise. Now we can push it to full fine, so that'll make the engine and propeller turn faster. At that same power setting, however, the blades will be a finer pitch. They'll be biting less air, so it'll turn faster. So let's push it all the way forward, and you can hear and see the RPM increase. Now it's almost redlining there, so let's pull it back. Now on takeoff, you want that full fine to get maximum clawing of the air. If you have it too coarse, that's kind of like trying to take off in fourth gear in a car. You're not going to get the best power at low speed. So we've got this set back about where it was. Now one other thing that's not, it's common on some aircraft, but it does vary from aircraft to aircraft. There's an expression that says flying a constant speed propeller with the setting square, which means 2200 RPM and about 2200 manifold pressure. Let's boost it up a bit. So they're about the same. So that's if you hear the expression flying with square numbers, that's what that means. But that's not always the case with all aircraft. Such the Beaver is, for example, with the radial engine, the settings are considerably different because they turn at a lower speed. Anyway, let's now try different throttle setting and see what happens. So we're going to increase the throttle, so we'll increase manifold pressure, but it should not change the engine and the propeller speed. So up we go with manifold pressure. So now we're at full power, 26 0.7 inches of mercury. We're still in the green, so it's acceptable. A little hard on fuel consumption. We're not really going to be going any faster for the amount of fuel we're going to be consuming. So if we pull it back to about where it was, we get the maximum range, so maximum efficiency. Now if we pull the throttle right off, there will be a limit to when the RPM will drop, because we're losing so much engine power that it's going to drop down. And that's pushing it, so we better get back where it was. So what we'll do now is take the simulator up to 10,000 feet. So let's take a look and see if we're back stable. We're still heading west. Airspeed is low because we were reducing our power setting, 3,000 feet. So let's jump it up to 10. So nice thing about simulators, it's an awful lot cheaper and quicker to operate if you want to practice things than if you're doing it for real. So that's pretty close, 10,000 feet. Now, to keep us there, let's reset our altitude for the autopilot up to 10. Heading is set, altitude is set. Now let's get it back up. And there we go. All right, just a bit of fiddling around with the autopilot, but we're pretty close to nice and stable there. So let's go back to our engine settings. Quick look outside. Yep, we're still flying. Good. And we'll get this set back up so we can see the levers and the dials. So engine is stable. Now look at the manifold pressure. Remember, we haven't changed any of the engine settings. All we've done is magically make the plane go up to 10,000 feet. And look at how much power. We haven't changed the throttle setting, but we're way less than the 22 inches of mercury. RPM, right where it should be, because that prop setting, change in altitude didn't change anything. We've just got less power. Now that's for two reasons. At higher altitude, at perfect carburetor fuel-air mix, we're still developing much less power. And so to compensate, let's put some more power on. However, at higher altitude, we're adding more fuel than we should be. So let's pull the mixture back. And we're going to do that to the point where the RPM drops. So it's dropping, so we'll rich it up a bit and just a smidge more. So now the engine's running at optimum fuel-air mixture. And again, we did that by pulling the mixture back to the point where the RPM dropped significantly, push it back up to where it was at its highest position, and give it a bit more rich. Now, look at the power setting. It's still less than it was. So let's go to the throttle and push it to the firewall. And notice at 10,000 feet, we have the same RPM. We've set the mixture so that it is leaner to compensate for less air density. And we've firewalled the throttle, so we're developing even less horse. We're still developing less power than we did at a cruise setting at 3,000 RPM. So 10,000 feet is about the limit for this plane, especially if you don't have oxygen for the pilot. Once you're over 10,000 feet, the pilot really should be on oxygen in order for their brain to function at optimum levels. Above that, pilots get a little sleepy, they don't think straight, and accidents happen. I mean, and it'll end up being fatal. So we're at 10,000 feet. Once again, thinned out the mixture to make the fuel-air mixture optimum, and added throttle to compensate for the fact that the engine just isn't developing as much power. Propeller setting was never touched. So that's how the levers and the primary engine controls work at various altitudes with an airplane equipped with the constant speed propeller.